Okay, we're gonna, a couple housekeeping items on the front end. We will, for folks filing in late, we will send out a recording of this to everybody who registered, and it will be available online as well. If you have any questions during the course of the webinar, you can type them either in the Q&A or the chat area, and we will answer those as they come up. If it's relevant during the kind of the conversation, and then otherwise we'll kind of get to those at the end, and then there'll be kind of an open session at the end if anybody has any questions at that point. So without further ado, we'll get this kicked off here. And my name is Jeff Ellis. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Wherefore. Wherefore is an ERP that focuses on the cannabis industry. We operate in every state that allows it in the United States as well as Canada. And I am lucky enough to have David and Rachel here from Michael and Macomber, and I'm going to pass it over to them to kind of walk through our our webinar here on the transition from BioTrack to Metrc in Illinois. So there.
Cool. Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, we've been working with operators in cannabis for a while now. Like with Wherefore, we've been working in multiple states. We've spent a lot of time with companies that are doing transitions either from no regulatory environment into systems like Metrc, BioTrack, MJ Freeway. But also those that are transitioning from one system into Metrc, into another. And we actually have a presence here in Illinois, and we're starting to see that some of the challenges for Illinois are getting very, very, very applicable. They're getting real very fast. And so we wanted to reach out and try to connect with people and try to help, whether that's from the tagging process, some of the new compliance processes and the timelines around those, what you can and cannot control that you used to. A lot of that stuff is really important. And so we're really eager to reach out. Like I said, we've had a lot of experience inside of cannabis, but not just in cannabis, but really much inside of ERP in general. We have an understanding of what best practices are for highly regulated industries, as well as for the challenges, whether it's in a manufacturing environment, whether you're cultivation and you're doing planning, you're also doing regulatory reporting, or if you're in the retail spaces. We've used a lot of different systems to apply it to a myriad of different business requirements. Everybody's need is a little bit different. And so we are really eager to reach out to Illinois for this transition. We're basically having these conversations in like the 3-part format. What's the change look like? What you should be able to expect, both in terms of what's changed, but also what can you expect that systems should be able to provide? There are some minimum viables that you shouldn't expect less than that. And then how can some of these integrated systems actually help provide not just the base level that you need, but added value? If you're going to make a change, making a change that adds value is really important. And ultimately, we want to make this stuff really, really specific. So if you have questions as we're going through, if we're talking through stuff too high level and you're looking for details, we're here to provide those. We've been the butts in the seats, and we've also been all the way to the people who are planning these initiatives at a top level. So we can speak at any level that's needed. But we'll go ahead and start with the first stage of this, and that is, what's the biggest change? So I'm going to hand it off to Rachel. Rach, for, let's say, from the regulatory databases, you have your information in BioTrack, you have everything that has tags there, you're needing to migrate to the next system. Yeah. What's changing?
So there's a lot of things that are changing in between these two systems. I think that a lot of people who have gone through the Metrc training, I'm assuming most people who have been on this call have been through whatever training Metrc has provided to state operators, which I know is happening back in April. You're going to notice that there's definitely a lot more standardization happening across the system. So everything from the drop downs, reason codes, et cetera, are going to be standardized inside of Metrc. There's some really good things that are happening. For example, there are, when an adjustment is needed, you no longer have to file a paper form with the state and then wait for the state to make your change inside of BioTrack. You now can make it directly inside of Metrc, but then all of these kinds of things come with some additional changes to the way that you do business, the way that your staff has worked with products, and even down to the way that data is recorded. One of the biggest changes that we see happening in Illinois is actually around the tags themselves and the reporting and the fields available in these systems. Just in order to be able to provide a little bit of information on that, I think a picture is worth 1,000 words. And Rachel is known for being able to do 1,000 words, but we'll just do the picture instead. So for example, in BioTrack, I know not all of these formats are exactly the same, but there's something similar to this. There could be a plant UID that would have PLT and then a series of numbers, PLT indicating it's a plant, the date of creation, and then a sequential identifier that is for that day or that batch. In Metrc, a plant is going to look just like this. Same kind of thing around a harvest batch. If we are going to look at, if I can get myself to, there we go. If we look at a harvest batch in BioTrack, again, there's some embedded information inside of the identifier that gives you information like it's a batch or a harvest ID, the date of creation, and then a sequential. Some of that information will be available inside of Metrc because it's not exactly a Metrc tag in that situation. But again, it's not going to necessarily give you everything that you are wanting to look at. For example, you don't know the difference between, for mango haze here, that's a clone batch versus mango haze here, that's a harvest batch. Both of them are mango haze. You don't know which one's a clone, which one's a harvest by just looking at that UID. And then finally, when we are looking at packages, again, before PKG indicates the package, and then the date of creation and a sequential identifier that is tied to the originating batch or harvest. Again, it's just a sequential number that is provided to you in Metrc. And so the question becomes, what were you able to use these kinds of tags before inside of BioTrack to help support your operations? That is not going to be the same in the future. So these are the fields and reporting that the fields that are available inside of Metrc. So you're going to have your tag, you'll have a field that indicates the source harvest or the source package, processing jobs, et cetera, but how does this get reported? Just because the field is there does not necessarily mean that the fields will all align on a report the same way as they did in BioTrack, nor does it mean that that you will be able to necessarily just look at a product and know something like the date it was created. You would actually need to take that tag number, that Metrc tag number, go into Metrc to be able to see the rest of this information, because on the tag, all you are going to have is just the tag itself. So this definitely does change a lot of things in that regard.
So then if we're looking at having basically different access to that information than what we had before, your example at the end I think was great. Previously from the tag, I could actually get a lot of inherent information out of that. Right now, I have to know, how do I get visibility to that information? And knowing how you're going to get it in the future basically helps you to know, what should I structure my information like right now in order to migrate into these systems, right?
Yeah, and this actually brings up the part that's really important in planning right now for teams as they are getting ready to actually make the migration and are actively in the process of making the migration right now into Metrc. So what information are you going to put into those different fields? What information in BioTrack are you going to choose to have go in to those different fields? Some of the information is fairly straightforward. Item strain is probably not going to be something that there's a lot of discussion around, but a production batch number, that might be where you're wanting to embed a lot more information, such as what the harvest date was. We've had clients in the past that have decided to always include the harvest date in their production batch number, so that even when they're looking at a finished good flower, they can look at the production batch number and still have information as to what the harvest date was of that flower. So really, there's a lot of information out there about how to get your actual tags into Metrc, how to get your information into Metrc. And it really comes down to several steps that are pretty high. I'll just get the high level because, again, this is information that I can send to you in an email. I'm going to be doing a LinkedIn post later this week on it. But essentially what it is you are going to go through and decide how you're going to use your fields. You're going to get that master data into Metrc. Please do note that the state of Illinois in the future, and to some extent right now, does require pre-approval on certain kinds of things such as the item name, etc. So that's something that you're going to need to be able to bring into your process if you haven't already. And so all of that master data has to get into Metrc first. And then there is a initial, I think it's called a initial batch transfer. So essentially you create a transfer inside of Metrc, and that transfer allows you to transfer in all of your initial beginning inventory. So it's called an external beginning inventory transfer. The question, though, is really not about that process, because that process seems very straightforward, and it seems very simple when you go and Google it or just look at the set of instructions that are provided to you in your Metrc training, or that is out there on different sites. Where we really find that the devil is in the details comes around making sure that all of this information is appropriate and lined up correctly. The import of that initial information is done with a CSV file. So you can create a CSV file. You can hand enter it. I don't recommend hand jamming it, especially if you've got more than like 7 pieces, because you're going to be there forever and ever. So again, there is CSV files that can be used to import in that beginning external transfer. But having done this for multiple companies across multiple systems, from Metrc all the way through full ERP systems, I can tell you that when you do that kind of an import, it's really important that the data actually lines up correctly. So for example, the information of the data that you put into Metrc at the beginning, so say the item name that you put into Metrc at the beginning, if the item name in your import template has a leading space, has a following space, has space dash space rather than just a dash, has a character that Metrc won't allow, like an ampersand or a exclamation point, those kinds of things, then what will happen is when you do that import, it will fail, and you'll end up finding yourself needing to find another way to get that information in. When you do that import of that initial external beginning data, you want to make sure that it really is super clean and is going to have a very high success rate. Most of the lines that go in, most of the lines that are on there will go in. The world is not as clean as we would like it to be, and we know how easy it is for these kinds of things to get really messy. So that's one of the things that we think is really important right now for companies to be looking at as they are making this move over to a new system.
Yeah. So then if we're looking at different, I'll call them business units. So we've got cultivation, we have manufacturing, we have distribution, retail. What are the different things that should be considered as, for example, cultivation is preparing to build out their inventory that they're going to load into into Metrc? What are the key considerations for each of those units?
Yeah, so I know that the state of Illinois is allowing a kind of phased approach here in terms of getting your information in. So there was supposed to be, I think it's April 25th through May 25th was when cannabis cultivators and processors are advised to start commencing using Metrc for all of their new cultivation cycles. Now, that is when they are being advised to do it. It's not when they're being required to do it. May 25th is the cutoff where all cannabis products held by the cultivator or the processor licenses should be affixed with Metrc tags and should be in the Metrc system. May 25th is when the cannabis testing laboratories will exclusively report testing results inside of Metrc. June 2nd is where all of the transfers start having to be documented and tracked in Metrc. And June 17th is when the full operational utilization of the Metrc system is expected across everyone from cultivation through processing labs and dispensaries. July 1st is when BioTrack system will cease to be the official tracking system. So that's kind of what that phased approach is. Since there is this phased approach, this comes into planning right now. So if you are a cultivator, planning for the new plants, plants take about a 12-week cycle to go from cutting to harvest. And so there's a question of where are you in that cycle? At what point do you need to start using Metrc tags? There's not 12 weeks in that space. So you're going to end up in a spot where there is a potential to have some of your plants needing to be retagged, things like that. And so there's a question around how that's going to work. If you're inside of the manufacturing processing, I think they're called infuser licenses here in Illinois, infuser licenses, then the question comes, products that you have received from a cultivator or from a third party that are in your system, needing to potentially retag those as well. I will say that Illinois has a benefit here in that the state of Illinois is providing the tags and not requiring you to pay for them. A lot of times an initiative like that, like this, comes at a pretty good cost to companies as they have to pay for all the Metrc tags. I think that's a really unique thing here in Illinois, and it's actually, in my opinion, been a pro to Illinois' approach. But you do need to consider at what point does it make sense to retag your different stages of either your plants or your different stages of your products. In terms of this is also important to understand what the different stages are that are allowed. I think there was a little bit more flexibility in BioTrack around what phase your plants could be at. Inside of Metrc, your phases are pretty locked down for plants. So they are, the mother plant, either seedlings or clones. They call them veg plants, flowering plants, and then harvested plants. And those are really the only phases that are allowed. So you need to see, are we going to need to combine things that we currently have? In which phase should they go into, unless you're already using those kind of phases. In terms of as an infuser, there is, or during the processing packaging portion of the product's life cycle, there really is a need to understand at what point do we have to recognize this product as a new thing. So for example, if you are extracting oil and then allowing that oil to be aged so that it crashes and you get, diamonds or sauce or sugar or one of those kinds of concentrates, at what point do you need to recognize that as a new thing? And that really comes into planning for your production workflows inside of Metrc. That's somewhere that we have found the way that Wherefore handles their formulas to be really, really helpful to make that a very easy decision to make, because you have a very clear structure for that. The structure is not quite as clear inside of Metrc because the state doesn't standardize those types of phases like it does with the plant. And so really you need to understand where you believe that you need to tell Metrc that something has changed in that product life cycle. When it comes to the dispensary side of the world, at that point, where you need to, in terms of planning for this, it's one, making sure that anything that you are going to be buying, you can get inside of Metrc. So if your third party has not already gotten approval for that item, and you are hoping that you're going to be ordering it at a certain point in time, hopefully that can't happen. Hopefully they have had to report it already to Metrc. But if you're doing any kind of pre-ordering in the future of an item that might not be made, to make sure that they've got those items there and ready inside of Metrc so that you can bring them into your Metrc environment. Additionally, there's been a kind of a thought that maybe we can sell through enough of our BioTrack material in the dispensaries, or even wholesale for the cultivation and the processor licenses underneath the BioTrack tags, and then not really have to retag as many things. Again, I don't know that that's necessarily going to be the way it works in the real world. And I do think that there's probably going to be a much higher retagging lift at dispensaries than maybe people would have thought to begin with. You're going to want to make sure that transfers that are coming over with the correct information on them as you start to see those, and that you can get that information into Metrc. So you need to know at what point your cutoff is going to happen, and you're going to make that transition. It's required to be made, what was the date? I believe June 17th. But is that the day that you're going to require it? Or are you going to do something a little bit earlier so that you can start bringing in the product that's coming from your wholesalers? Additionally, on the dispensary side, there is a question of POS integration. What POS system are you currently using? Do they already have an integration with Illinois' Metrc API? We know we've worked with a lot of POS systems, and we know some of them do have an integration already built, and some of them do not, and do not expect to have it done necessarily by June 17th. The reason why that's really important is that BioTrack actually has some POS capabilities. Metrc does not have any POS capabilities. So all transactions done inside of a dispensary have to be reported to Metrc that day. And so if your POS system is not integrated, then there's going to be a conversation about how you're going to manually take the information out of your POS system and get it into Metrc. Additionally, since there is an integration required there for a dispensary, there's also the question of, as you're building that master data inside of Metrc to do that initial external beginning transfer, does that line up with your POS system? Do you have all of the different fields mapped appropriately for that as well? So really, there's a lot of planning around the mapping of old information in BioTrack into the new fields inside of Metrc to make sure that this can all happen seamlessly. And you're not set up in a situation where you have product that you would like to have on your menu to sell, either as a wholesaler or as a dispensary, and not being able to actually move it because you haven't gotten it into all the systems that it needs to be in.
Yeah. I mean, we've been doing this for a while now. It would be a rare day when you don't find a large data set that doesn't have struggles of things like characters that you've put into your data set are getting rejected or get converted to some gibberish as you're loading it. Having non-visible characters that are just, kind of some of the stuff that builds up over time that end up in your system and causing havoc. And a huge one that gets missed is just data validation. You want the relationship of each of your batches, and each of your UIDs really have to relate to the master data. And in Metrc, it lays that out. But being able to validate that all those connections are correct before you go and load stuff is super critical. Just give yourself the time. The timeline on this is really important. Give yourself a little bit of the turning radius for each one of those. And we've spent a lot of time in this, so we feel really comfortable with the tools, but I can completely appreciate that some people will feel either, hey, I have a full-time job already. The last thing I need to do is a bunch of data validation, or else they're saying, I'm not as familiar with taking relatable databases and working with them. So those are definitely things to consider.
There's one additional thing to consider here as well. Oftentimes when people are looking at the use of Metrc, they're really looking at the operations teams, and that is where the biggest impact is to the operations teams. But in terms of this change of reporting, particularly the change of reporting that is happening, and the mapping of what fields were used in BioTrack versus the fields in Metrc, is going to impact a lot more departments than just the operations department. It's going to impact supply chain planning. It's going to impact finance. A lot of the financial teams use inventory information to help with their closes, or as a foundational documentation in their closes. And so the types of reports that you rely on inside of BioTrack on a day-to-day basis right now for planning, for dashboard feedback, for month-end closes, things like that, may be significantly changing. That's one of the areas that we are looking, that's one of the reasons why we've looked at a lot of different options in terms of third-party softwares that can support that in the way that Metrc cannot provide. So where the reporting changes in Metrc, and there's less customization in reporting and things like that. That's one of the areas where a software like Wherefore can really provide some significant support. Most people are not looking to do a major ERP initiative right now in the state of Illinois, but in some ways it's being pushed on you. So even if you're not looking to do a full ERP build, there is some ERP functionality in this, especially on the reporting side and even on the costing side, that BioTrack provided that Metrc simply cannot provide. And so the need to look for systems that can report to Metrc effectively. So to look for a system like Wherefore that can report to Metrc efficiently, that can help you be efficient in tagging plants, tagging packages, etc., as well as providing the data in a multiple different reporting formats that are available for financial teams, supply chain team, planning teams, inventory counting teams, etc., is a really important thing to consider right now as you're making this shift.
Rach, well, I want to make sure we leave space for questions. So feel free, everybody. There's a question and answer out here. There's also a chat. Feel free to add things in. But one of the things that was mentioned is the limitations on defining your product the same way that you used to. Are adding on any of the third-party softwares that integrate with Wherefore able to regain some of that ability to define your product the way you want? And can you explain what that is like?
Yeah, you mean integrate with Metrc? The answer to that is yes.
Sorry.
So Wherefore allows you to have additional fields in addition to what's available inside of Metrc. So for example, Metrc has your tag, your source harvest, your source packages, source processing jobs, item, category, strain, and then that's pretty much, and production batch number. Wherefore has more fields than that. So there's obviously your tag, there is your batch, there is the ability to give the batch a separate name if you would like to. They call it a batch description. There's also the ability to categorize with a hierarchy. So there's both categories and groups inside of Wherefore that allows you to then group things together into filterable views. So you can see a lot more filters and a lot more reporting information than you could inside of Metrc. So inside of Metrc, you can really only group that it is either a package or it's a plant or it's a harvest batch or it's a clone batch. That's really the groups that you can get. Those are the categories that you can kind of get in there. But inside of Wherefore, because categories are separate from Metrc, not necessarily connected to Metrc, you can user define that, and then that allows your team to be able to view the inventory in a lot of different ways. Additionally, Wherefore allows you to be able to define formulas and formula maps. So what products all go together to make things. And so that can allow your supply chain team to view the inventory in terms of what it can be used to make, or what work orders are already out there, things that you plan on making. So there's a lot more on the planning side that Metrc simply just doesn't have at all, that a system like Wherefore would provide you. So there is some opportunity in this transition to not only be able to recoup some of the stuff that you're losing in terms of reporting and data definition in the shift from BioTrack to Metrc, but to even take one step further. Again, that does require you to plan, but you're going to have to plan anyways to be able to make this switch effectively. And so if you have to do it, you might as well get the most benefit out of it.
Yeah. We're getting close to the end, but if I'm retail, and I know what I have on my own BioTrack, inventory, but I'm looking at also needing to bring in whatever might come from a sister company in terms of bringing us product or third party. How would I approach all of those different data sets? What questions would I ask myself about those in order to make sure that I'm building out my metric loads for retail in a way that I can effectively receive it, know what I'm receiving, and sell it. Is it different for like third party versus internal, or how do you approach that?
With internal, you're always going to have more visibility on what they're making. So you have a lot more information on what they're making and the naming convention of it and things like that. Inside of Metrc, when a new manifest arrives at a retail location, because it is a finished good, and actually this is the same case whether you're talking retail, cultivation, or processing. When a manifest comes, the Metrc item name from the shipping license, the license that's sending it to you, is there and available. And what you have to do is you have to then map that to the item that you are receiving. And so you have to say, when I receive blank, I'm actually receiving this other thing in my system inside of my Metrc. Now, with something like Wherefore, that is done automatically. So when you receive something on a PO inside of Wherefore, because it's called a PO in Wherefore, then those items are already mapped to Metrc, and the Metrc tag is the piece of information that makes that connection for you. So it allows you to have a lot of flexibility. But if we're talking about the retail side of things, then your POS system is going to usually make that determination for you if it is connected to Metrc. If it is not connected to Metrc, then you will by hand have to say, this thing that I am receiving is connected to this other thing inside of Metrc. So let's say that somebody is sending you something and their item name is gummies-wana-pink lemonade. And in your system, you call it pink lemonade-wana-gummies. Then you would have to map those two things together. So you'd have to say, when I receive this in on this Metrc, it actually goes to this other item. And so if you don't have a connected POS system, that's something you'd have to do directly inside of Metrc at the time of receipt. So again, you have to have your master data already in there, which means that when you place the order with your supplier, they need to provide you information as to what you're getting. I know that that's a big deal inside of cannabis, because a lot of times people will place an order, especially at the retail level, people place an order and there isn't something available. So for example, I don't have OG Kush, but I have another Kush strain of flower. I'm going to send you this other Kush strain of flower instead. And so what you actually see coming in on the manifest isn't always the thing that you ordered. Both in terms of quantity as well as in terms of actual product. So the retail teams end up more often than almost any other stage to be in this kind of scramble to make sure that they change their master data and that they then can receive. That's why a lot of retail companies or dispensaries ask for the manifest to be sent over, sometimes 48 hours in advance, things like that. So again, that comes down, if you're not in the retail world, if you are the sister company and your retail company needs to have that manifest 24 hours in advance or 48 hours in advance because of how it works in Metrc. If you're using a system like Wherefore, your sister company is using a system like Wherefore, they can actually send off to you that pick list that they're picking from, the pack list once they've done that pick, pack, ship process. And you can actually get that information right away, even before you could get it through Metrc, which would allow you then to be more prepared. So there's different ways that as a retail company, your SOPs may change with this Metrc, or your request to your shipping company or your shipping license, your vendor might change. And then there's also ways that the system that your vendor is using can help support this being a much easier process, or can make it a more difficult process.
Well, I'm really appreciating everybody's time here today. If we can help you with your data transformation, please reach out. If we can help you with planning, like you hear, a lot of this is planned in advance. How to prepare your data to be able to get into Metrc and how to transact after it's there. Please reach out. If we can help you in understanding how these integrated tools might be onboarded to help both take care of these needs as well as add value, we're here, Wherefore is here. Even if it's not necessarily an inventory system, but if you're wanting to consider how some of the integrated POSs would work and might help, please reach out. We're also going to be posting things on LinkedIn. We have either our own blogs or blogs with partners like Wherefore and others that we link to. So reach out there. And if you want to plan just one-on-one, we're open. We're giving free consultations because one, we want to figure out what people need help with and if we can assist, and two, if we can make or send you in the right direction to some of these tools that work, we're eager to do so. So I think that's it. Jeff, is there any closing details for today's session?
No, we appreciate your time as well. A lot of good information. And again, you can catch this in future webinars on YouTube.
Yeah, and we're going to be doing more of these AMAs. We get the questions that come in from other operators, and those are going to potentially be pertinent to a number of different people. So we'll keep posted with the remaining content. Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.
Great day.